Hi everyone, this is Dr. Victoria Nalule, and today I want to talk about climate change and human rights. So, in the previous sessions, we already talked about what climate change entails, the impacts of climate change, and also the different people who are affected by climate change. So, today we want to try and connect how climate change impacts on human rights or how climate change impacts escalate human rights abuses. Human rights, we all know what human rights are. Your right to life, your right to a healthy environment, the right to education, freedom of speech, and so on. But today we want to focus on those specific rights that are impacted by climate change. So I'll start by sharing my slides. So, like I mentioned, I'm Dr. Victoria Nalule, and in today's session, we want to look at climate change and human rights. So, by definition, obviously, when we're talking about climate change, we have to first ascertain what climate change really entails or what it means. The legal definition is to the effect that climate change, those are changes in weather patterns for a prolonged period of time. And the climate change or the greenhouse gas emission is primarily driven by human activities. For instance, the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, and other activities really that lead to global warming. So, unlike the various skepticism about climate change that some of them will attribute climate change impacts due to natural causes, or some people might argue that climate change is due to natural causes. That is skepticism. The legal definition really highlights the fact that the climate change that we're experiencing is due to human activities. So, for us to be able to address climate change, we have to either stop the human activities that are leading to global warming or even find ways of mitigating them. So there are various impacts associated with climate change, including the rising sea levels, more frequent extreme weather events, and ecosystem disruptions. And these have been experienced in different countries. So without a healthy environment or without us addressing climate change, it will be hard for us to even protect human rights. Because, like, as we're going to see in this discussion, some climate change impacts directly infringe on our basic human rights, like the right to life, the right to a healthy living, the right to a clean environment. If people are dying because of the floods, if people are dying because of droughts, if there is food insecurity, all these are going to impact on the various human rights, like the right to life, right to food, right to water. So the connection between climate change and human rights cannot be ignored, and it's something that we need to take seriously. Practitioners, human rights practitioners, have to really find ways on how they can incorporate climate change in their literature. Most of them have already done that, but what this also entails is to ensure that we have more initiatives to address climate change, because now we see that there is really a very big connection between climate change and human rights. So obviously, for us to be able to understand how human rights are impacted by climate change, we have to first understand the various impacts of climate change. We have, for instance, extreme weather conditions, like in most cases, many countries are experiencing more intense hurricanes. The droughts and floodings are very common in different countries. So all these extreme weather conditions do directly have an impact on people, on the animals, on the planet. Then we have ocean acidification due to rising carbon dioxide levels, which harm marine life and ecosystems. For for the people who are living on the coastal states or the coastal islands or coastal countries, they are directly impacted by the ocean acidification. Then you have ecosystem disruptions, where we're seeing loss of habitat, species extinction, and shifting biodiversity. Then you have food security, and this is because of the unpredictable weather which reduces crop yields and livestock productivity. So climate change impacts, including the heat waves and the unpredictable weather, are making it hard for the farmers to actually be able to predict the weather as they used to do. Because most farmers, especially in developing countries, they base on seasons. They would know a season to plant, a season to sow, a season to do all those activities that they do in farming. So the unpredictable weather definitely impacts on the food security, because now they can no longer predict the seasons as they used to predict them. Then we're seeing the challenge of water scarcity due to altered rainfall patterns, which led to freshwater shortages. Then we have health risks, where we are seeing that various diseases are being spread due to increased heat-related illnesses. Even the floods themselves, they lead to diseases like Ebola, cholera, and other diseases, really. Then another common thing or impact is the displacement and migration. We're seeing a rise in the climate refugees, because if people who used to stay in a community where the environment was good, the climate was predictable, can no longer stay in that climate, or they can no longer stay in that environment, they would have to find other suitable environments or places where they can live on, they can go on to live on with their lives, where they can do agriculture, they can do farming. So there's an increase in climate refugees who are forced to leave their homes due to extreme weather conditions. So now we understand that human rights are provided for at the national, region, and international level. So whereas each country will have like their own human rights laws, even at the regional level, different regional organizations go ahead to enact regional human rights laws. And even at the international level, obviously, we have the various international instruments on human rights. We need to note that human rights are really the same across most countries, because most of these countries have already. So human rights are the same across different countries, because most of these countries have already uh, enacted human rights laws, or most of them are members to these international instruments on human rights. So climate change threatens all climate change threatens all human rights, all the basic human rights, because we have seen posters or even people arguing to the fact that there are no human rights on a dead planet. If we have a dead planet, then that means that everything on that planet is dead. The people are dead, the plants are dead, the animals are dead. So which human rights are you going to protect on a dead planet? So it becomes urgent for us to first find ways and initiatives to address climate change, because if we fail to address climate change and we have a dead planet, then which humans are you going to protect? Whose rights are you going to protect? So, for us to be able to address climate change, we have to first and foremost address them. For us to be able to protect the various human rights, we have to first and foremost address climate change. So, there are various human rights that are provided for in international instruments. For instance, the right to life, which is provided for under Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then also Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights also provides for a right to life, which is also protected by law. And then the Paris Agreement, which is a very influential instrument when it comes to climate change, it also acknowledges the relationship between climate change and human rights, aiming to reduce the risks to life caused by climate-induced extreme events. So, what is the impacts of climate change on the right to life? The extreme weather events, such as hurricanes and wildfires, lead to loss of life and threaten human survival. We have been seeing on the news in different countries people who have died because of the floods in Pakistan, people who have died because of the droughts in East Africa, people who have died because of the heat waves and the wildfires in the US. So the impact of climate change really is within us. Wherever you look, you are seeing people are dying because of these impacts of climate change. So it becomes very necessary and very imperative for us to address climate change so that we can protect people's basic lives to life, like a basic right to life. Then you have the right to health. Uh, under the okay, yeah. So the first one was the right to life. Then the right to health. This is provided for under Article 25 of the UNHR, which provides to a right to an adequate standard of living, including health and well-being. Then also the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights under Article 12 recognizes the right to health and access to health services. The World Health Organization Framework Convention on Climate Change also emphasizes the need to protect public health from climate change impacts. We also have, at the national level, we have various health laws. At a regional level, we also have various instruments that really protect the right to life. I mean, the right to health. So the climate change impacts like air pollution, water scarcity, they do lead to an infringement on the right to health because the air pollution, like the burning of fossil fuels, we have had instances, or like in the Niger Delta, where the water has been polluted due to the oil spills, where the gas flaring has impacted people's health. So, and then all those impacts that are associated with human activity, they really lead to air pollution. They lead to an abuse of a healthy environment, and that directly impacts on the right to health. And we're seeing a rise in various diseases such as malaria, heat strokes, other people getting cancer. All those, most of these diseases are associated with the impacts that are associated with climate change. So it also becomes imperative for us to be able to address climate change so that we can protect people's rights to life. Then the other important right is the right to food, which is also provided for under international instruments like Article 11, which recognizes the right to adequate food and the right to be free from hunger. Then we also have the Right to Food Guidelines of 2004, which stresses the need for ensuring food security and supports adaptation strategies in the face of climate change. So obviously the extreme weather conditions like droughts, floods, they disrupt agriculture and farming, and this has led to food scarcity in many countries, and hence directly infringing on people's right to food. Then we have the right to water, which is provided for under Article 11, and this article recognizes the right to an adequate standard of living, including water. The United Nations General Assembly Resolution 64 of 2010 also recognizes the human right to water and sanitation as essential for the full enjoyment of life. And also the UN Human Rights Council Resolution of 2010, emphasizes the human right to water and sanitation, calling on states to ensure safe and sufficient water for all. Obviously, climate change impacts like droughts, they really escalate water scarcity in many countries. And the floods also lead to water contamination and other climate change impacts that really lead to air pollution or water pollution also make it hard to have access to fresh water. So climate change and its impacts, they do directly impact on the right to water. Then the right to housing. The Under Article 25, we see that the international instrument recognizes the right to an adequate standard of living, including housing. And then the UN Habitat number 3 New Urban Agenda of 2016 focuses on resilient housing and suitable urban development to face climate change impacts. So, in instances of flooding, especially for coastal communities, this directly impacts on their right to housing. And also extreme weather events like hurricanes, heat waves, they destroy housing, meaning that climate change and its impact do directly impact on the right to housing. So, having noticed that there are various human rights that are being infringed upon due to climate change impacts, the question is, what can we do? And the answer to that question is we need to address climate change. How do we address climate change? Through mitigation and also adaptation programs, whereby we build resilience, especially in vulnerable regions, to minimize human rights impacts. Most of the countries that are being impacted by climate change, they are poor countries. On top of the various challenges they're experiencing in their countries, the economic challenges, social challenges, now you also have to add climate change impacts that directly impact on their human rights. So it becomes necessary to have climate adaptation programs, to also have the international collaboration and international support, especially when it comes to climate finance, and then inclusive policy making, ensure that marginalized communities are included in climate decision making processes, and also to promote sustainable development and also to promote decarbonization of the different sectors of the economy, including a shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy, which most people would call the energy transition. So, obviously, when it comes to climate change law, we'll really need to find the relevant international instruments that provide for the human rights. Uh, and the first one is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. And this is a foundation document that sets forth fundamental human rights for all people, regardless of their nationality, ethnicity, or religion. And then there's some key provisions you can look at, but we've already mentioned, the most important provisions when it comes to climate change is the right to life, right to health, right to housing. And then the other important international instrument is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of 1966. And this is a multilateral treaty which aims at ensuring civil and political rights. The most important provisions in this convention, which is relevant to climate change, we have Article 6, which talks about the right to life and that no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of life. And then other provisions really might not be connected to climate change, like the right to freedom of expression, but people who are really climate change activists who always get caught up in political scandals because of the way they're expressing themselves or the way they're expressing their support for to stop the burning of fossil fuels can really quote that right. But when it comes to international instruments, really what we're looking for are the rights that are directly infringed upon when it comes to climate change. We also have the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights of 1966, which focuses on ensuring economic, social, and cultural rights of all individuals. And then under Article 11, it talks about the right to an adequate standard of living, including the right to food, clothing, and housing. Obviously, the climate change impacts like droughts, flooding, heat waves, hurricanes, they directly impact on Article 11. And then also the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. Climate change impact affect people physically, but they also impact on the mental health of the various people. So you notice that Article 12 or the rights that are enshrined in Article 12 are directly impacted by climate change. And then we also have the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Climate change and its impact, they do directly impact on children's rights because children are vulnerable, as some of the vulnerable people we have in communities. And when these impacts of these impacts that are associated with climate change, like the flooding, hurricanes, heat waves, when they happen, they directly impact on the children and their rights to life. So climate change is a human rights issue because, like we have noticed, the impacts of climate change directly infringe on people's rights to food, right to water, right to a healthy environment, right to life, right to health, right to housing, and so many other rights. So in your free time, get a country case study and analyze the impacts of climate change on human rights in that country. Then also analyze the national, regional, and international instruments as they relate to that country. Like we have mentioned already, children, women, the disabled, and other vulnerable people in community, their rights are the most infringed upon due to climate change impacts like the flooding we're seeing here. Women always try to protect their children, and in most cases, we have to learn that there are no human rights. We will never fight for human rights on a dead environment. So let us take action because there is no planet B. This is the only planet we have. So let's try to protect it. So that marks the discussion for today on climate change and human rights. It's very, very important for us to take climate change very seriously because many people have lost lives. Many people have lost their housing. We have an increased number of climate refugees. Many poor countries cannot afford to adapt to the climate change impacts that they're experiencing. So, for us to protect human rights at an international level, we have to ensure that those who are the most vulnerable to climate change impacts, they get the necessary finances to be able to mitigate and also adapt to the climate change impacts. So thank you very much. That marks the end of our session today.